In this tutorial, we're going to look at styles of communication. Freya Stark says this: every country has its own way of saying things. The important thing is that which lies behind people's words. Communication, the sending and receiving of messages, is an integral part of culture. Some people go so far as to say that culture is communication. What they probably mean is that since culture is such an important ingredient in all behavior, and so much of behavior is spent on one type of communicating or another, then it's hard to tell where one ends and the other takes over. In any case, whether or not they are one and the same, culture and communication certainly go hand in hand. In a cross-cultural context, communication, like everything else, is more complicated. It's almost impossible to send a message that does not have at least some cultural content, whether it's in the words themselves, in the way they are said, or in the non-verbal signals that accompany them. And even if it was possible to send a message without any cultural content, it's not possible to receive one without passing it through the filter of our own cultural background. All of which means that people may not interpret everything you say the way you meant it, and vice versa. Communication problems, especially misunderstanding and misinterpretation, are one of the most common frustrations experienced by people in any cultural setting, particularly where cross-cultural communication is taking place. Different styles of communication mean an increased possibility for misunderstanding. There are quite a few differences in communication style between cultures. The two most important for us to look at are indirect, or high context style, and the direct, or low context style. Context refers to the amount of understanding a person can be expected to bring to a particular communication setting. This understanding is often innate and largely unconscious, and cultures vary greatly in how much understanding a person generally brings to a situation. If a culture is less individualistic and more collectivist, then everyone knows how people are most likely to behave in a given situation. The shared information level is higher because people know exactly what to expect. This is called high context culture, because the shared information level about the context is higher. In high context cultures, people are able to communicate more subtly or more indirectly. In a low context culture, the opposite is true, and so people commonly use more direct communication. We will describe both communication styles. Indirect or high context. In high context cultures such as Thailand, China, Japan, France, and Saudi Arabia, which tend to be homogeneous and collectivist, people have a highly developed and refined idea of how most interactions will unfold, of how they and the person will behave in a particular situation. Because people in high context cultures already know and understand each other quite well, they have a more indirect style of communication. They have less need to be explicit and rely less on words to convey meaning, and especially on the literal meaning and the spoken word, and more on nonverbal communication. People often convey meaning or send messages by manipulating the context rather than using words. Because these cultures tend to be collectivist, people are more closely together and know what everyone else knows. Most cultural knowledge is implicit, not directly stated, through a myriad of tightly connected, long-term relationships. Information is contained in the context, so it doesn't need to be verbalized directly. Conversation often goes around the point. The overriding goal is the communication exchange, and it's maintaining the harmony or saving of face. In direct or low context cultures such as the US, UK, Canada, and Germany are individualistic, logical, and task-oriented. They tend to be more heterogeneous and accordingly have developed a more direct communication style. Less can be assumed about the other person in a heterogeneous society, and less is known about others in a culture where people prefer independence, self-reliance, and a greater emotional distance from each other, and mostly have a diverse, discrete, short-term relationship. They can't depend on manipulating context, not doing or not saying something that is always done or said in that situation, or communicating non-verbally to make themselves understood. They must rely more on words, and on those words being interpreted literally. Getting or giving information is the goal of most communication exchanges, so topics are handled straightforwardly. The structure of how relationships develop and are maintained in different cultures is the foundation for how communication takes place. Relationships in high context cultures with an indirect communication style will be more group-oriented because the structure of relationships dictates the communication style. Whereas in the culture where relationships are more individualistic, it will be by nature a low context culture with a direct communication style. Relationships in both types of culture could be diagrammed like this: direct and indirect. It's important to note that the defining characteristics of cultures are not independent from one another. So cultures that display certain characteristics will also inherently display others that are related. For example, cultures with an individualistic view of self tend to be universalist, low context, and use direct communication. A good place to start when trying to understand a culture is to build relationships with local people and to take time to learn from the inside how relationships work. To help you to define more clearly the differences between the direct and indirect styles of communication, we will describe some of the behaviors associated with each. The following behaviors are commonly associated with high context, indirect cultures. Communication is like it would be between siblings, where there is a kind of instinctive common understanding. People are reluctant to say no because a refusal threatens harmony, which is key in high context cultures. You have to read between the lines to understand the real message. What is overtly stated is whatever saves face. Use of intermediaries or third parties is frequent because it avoids direct confrontation. Use of understatement is frequent because it is more indirect. Yes means I hear you, not necessarily I agree with you, where it's difficult to say no. Yes has a less definitive meaning. People engage in small talk and catching up before getting down to business because relationships are more important in high context cultures and small talk cements relationships. A small issue in the context could have a significant meaning in what is being communicated. Someone not showing respect by sending an underling to a meeting or by not providing a refreshment might mean that all is not well. The message is often not in the words in high context cultures, and these other cultural signals are understood clearly by people in those cultures. People are already up to date on what is going on because close-knit networks are common in more collectivist, high context cultures. The rank and status of the messenger is important. The rank and status of the messenger is as important as the message because the message is not just in the words. People tell you what they think you want to hear so that you won't be upset because face must be saved and outward harmony must be maintained. These behaviors are commonly associated with low context, direct cultures. It's best to tell it like it is. Directness is preferred. It's okay to disagree with your boss at a meeting. To be able to disagree is expected in low context cultures where people can speak their mind no matter who they are speaking to. Yes means I agree with you, and words are taken more literally, on face value, rather than there being an unspoken communication accompanying the meaning of the words. Communication is like it would be between two casual acquaintances who have to spell things out because they do not instinctively understand each other. It's not necessary to read between the lines because the meaning is in the words. Business is done first, then small talk can take place after the task is completed if there is time. The task is more important than personal relationships in low context cultures. There is rarely any message in the context in low context cultures, so an issue with the context is seen on face value rather than having a significant meaning. People need to be brought up to date at a meeting because networks are less common, and it would not be expected that everyone had spent time with everyone else. And the message is what counts, not who the messenger is, because the words carry the meaning, not the context. We noted before that the defining characteristics of cultures are not independent and that certain characteristics are related to others. We will look at 4 continuums representing 4 areas related to communication. Degree of directness. We'll see on the direct side, people may say what they mean and mean what they say. You don't need to read between the lines. It's important to tell it like it is. Honesty is the best policy. The truth is more important than sparring someone's feelings. On the indirect side, people are indirect. They imply or suggest what they mean. Understatement is valued. You need to read between the lines. The truth, if it hurts, should be tempered. The role of context. For low context, heterogeneous and individualist cultures, little is already known. The message must be explicit and spelt out. Words are the primary means of communication. Nonverbal cues are not the key to understanding. And on high context, homogeneous and collectivist cultures, much is already known. The spoken word is not the primary means of communicating. Much is implied, but little needs to be said. Nonverbal cues and the context are the key. What is not said may be the message. The importance of face. On faceless importance side, face has moderate importance. The facts and your purpose are more important than being careful about what you say. Getting or giving information is the main goal of the communication exchange. Criticism is straightforward, and it's okay to say no and to confront people. On the other side, face is key. Saving face takes precedence over the facts. Maintaining harmony is the main goal of the communication exchange. Confrontation is avoided, and saying no is difficult. Criticism is handled very delicately. What you say and what you feel are often not the same. And the task or the person. On one side we have the task. The task is separated from the person. Do business first and then have small talk. Establishing a good personal relationship is not essential to getting the job done. The goal is accomplishing the task. And on the other side, we have the person. The task and the person can't be separated. Begin with small talk and then move to business. Personal relationship is a prerequisite to getting the job done. The goal is building the relationship. Most people who have studied this topic place Canadian culture somewhere where Australian culture is, but slightly on the direct, low context side, as in this diagram. Where would you place your country or your culture?